Okay, so earlier we discussed the conflict of contrivance. Now I'm going to discuss some other various topics. Almost what I would call my recreation, one of my recreation episodes. So let me just finish something and then I'll go. But yeah, the conflict of contrivance, just to recap, kind of like you're in a supposedly absolute state, right, where people indignantly insist on their lifestyle and everything they do, and they don't have like a healthy cognitive dissonance, or they use that almost as a defense mechanism, right, like their own ego. But then that's easy to control. Like you put people in a state by force, right, before they're old enough to think for themselves, etc., or through other empirical means, and then they'll insist upon that state that they didn't choose, right, just for that reason. Right, just because they're already in it, so that's easy to control. Right, rather than, okay, you'll tolerate it, you'll put up with it, but it's not absolute in that way. So give you a little teaser of a topic maybe here. I love that little ticker at the bottom that like I keep putting when I'm discussing a topic at length like that. So here's like a little amalgam theory short kind of part of the short stories that I write. Amalgam theory, like the concept of the human family, right? Well, like one last point on the conflict of contrivance, kind of like your way of life and modern society and everything is absolute, uniform, that like everybody should do it, you know, millions of people, right? Only if, or requiring the prerequisite of everything, like you need all this structure around it, you need social contrivance to reinforce it, you need distractions, folly, favoritism, you need overcompensation, bread and circuses. So like, people don't require much. That's why they'll go along with China or World War II Germany or anywhere, because, you know, if you give them bread and circuses, if you give them enough, then it doesn't matter, right? It doesn't take much. So the one line that I use from this minimalistic point of view, right, a minimalistic character that I've written about a number of times in my short stories is like, they could do anything. They could tolerate anything. They could live in the jungle, in the woods. They could sleep on the ground. They could eat one meal a day, right? They don't care. But they won't do it in service of contrivance. So when you say, like, your tolerance or your gratification that you get from being a trained animal, basically, that shouldn't be in service of contrivance. So you say, oh, you're putting up with all this hardship. But it's like, that hardship might be human created. That hardship might be a consequence of a flawed process that you're a part of. Like, oh, the part of the hardship in China could be that it's part of the government's mismanagement or ill intent or whatever. So it's like, yes, it's hardship, but like, so you'll reinforce that and take gratification, like, oh, look, I can tolerate this flawed process better than you, and you take pride in it. But right, you're in doing that, you're reinforcing it. So, you could tolerate World War II Germany better than me, and wow, what a great man you are for doing that. Like, okay, but you know, you never question, like, oh, maybe it shouldn't be tolerated. Maybe you don't want to do that. And then the flip side is, if you So he could tolerate anything. That's why he would tolerate nothing. He would make sure that it's worth it, because then it's not an ego gratification. Oh, look at how much I can tolerate versus how much you can tolerate, and I feel gratified for doing it. It's like, no, I'm going to make sure everything I do is worth it. So, okay, he'll eat one meal a day and pick berries and sleep on the ground in the woods. He's fine with doing that, because at least those conflicts are inherent somewhat. Right, he can deal with that. But why should he have to deal with a subversive state in any way if all that freedom is being taken away? Okay, you can't do that, and you have to defer, and you have to do all these things in social contrivance, etc. Now, why should he put up with that? Because it kind of sounds like entitlement, but it's like the entitlement of you let your whole life be controlled and everything restricted by society, etc. And now, it's a privilege to get something back. It's a privilege to have technology or the machination process or certain conveniences. It's not a privilege. That's what you sacrifice your inherent ability to think, your ability to self-actualize. It's what you sacrifice nature itself. Let it be monopolized by big corporations. Let every area of your life be restricted and restrained. It's like, is that not for something in return? Right, so it's a trade-off. And so you say, like, the pretense is functionalism. So if you're absolutist, you practice that same functionalism to an extreme degree, now you should be free of it. Or you're a minimalist, you don't require it. Right, now you shouldn't be restricted by it. But it's kind of like the expectation, even if you are a minimalist, you're still subject to it in a lot of ways. You can sacrifice all the supposed benefits of it. Right, so that's what the absolutist is always thinking, like, not just take gratification in this half-mass, endless, reinforced, regurgitated process. Is like, everything is a means to remove the need. It's like, oh, you do this for this reason, so okay, if I do it well enough, now I won't have to do it anymore. Or, I'll analyze whether it's really worth doing. Or, means is like that. So like, oh, like money changes you, or something, you get some new technology or resource that changes you. It's not that it changes you, it's like, you were putting up with something lesser because you had to, and now you don't have to. Instead of the gratification that goes into training people, like, oh no, that's why an older generation will be all salty. It's like, they didn't have that technology, so they pretended and gratified from doing something, so more effort without it. But really, it's like, oh, if they had that, they'd use it too. Like, so be careful with those sort of gratification tools, because you end up valuing something less. Like, let's do something just for the sake of it, even if it's less efficient, just so we feel gratified about it. This red car has been behind me for like an hour, not letting me go. But yeah, you're in a position where... Okay, I'll discuss a few of these other topics now, but like, just think about the ways that you're controlled. It's like a fallacy of the inability, like, oh, look, you lack some ability to do something, like social contrivance or appearances or whatever. What if it's a choice, or what if it's just a flawed process? like you don't appeal to those things. It's like, oh, that's somehow negative on you. But look at the big picture. Forget about you, right? You're like observing the flawed process. Like you, that's how people are controlled then, by appearance. That's all it would take to control you. So like the one who doesn't want to control you will right, like it is somehow to blame or projected. So what happens is you kind of feel like, inability to achieve a false absolute. Not that it's not absolute, couldn't be deliberate, or you couldn't choose something different. And so it's a situation where some of the other concepts here, let me try to think. The way I can explain this one is, the same sort of minimalist character that I was talking about. People are controlled kind of by their own ego perception, in the sense that, like, you think everything's about you, and that might seem like, okay, good, but then you're controlled by, like, your initial perception that way. And the reason why is because, right, you can't see the big picture. That's a good example of a contrivance state. How to identify is like people would be defined by non, or again, non is a negative, but people are defined by non in the sense that defined by what they don't do, by not doing something that's considered compulsory, rather than by what they do. And so, right, it's like, what if the social contrivance inhibition is like your unwillingness or not, lack of desire to perpetuate that process, and there is no uniform state is really what it means. It's not like, some absolute perfect thing, but some consistent standard that you yourself would present or pose, not like an absolute as uniformly forced, because that's what you got to really think. Look at the life that you live and other people around you. It's kind of like you really didn't choose anything. You can insist upon it, you can, whatever, but it's just not, why you take pride in it or anything like that is kind of surprising to me. And so, right, again, versus self-actualization from an inherent base state. A lot of this would be framed as a claim, like, you're telling people what to do or what not to do. You're observing what people do and why they do it. And if everybody had that awareness, then they may be less likely to do it, or they'd be less likely to uniformly all do basically the same sort of thing, right? Which, again, is based on bypassing critical thinking in such a way that it's just kind of tough. So it's not based on anything, and it's just kind of reactionary to an authority structure. So it's amazing, despite all our technology and everything like that, how is it possible that people are still that stupid, but they're controlled? And that's kind of the ego bypass thing too that you get. You use like emotion, ego, social contrivance. Because like, think about that. That's used as a prop a lot, which flies in the face of amalgam theory anyway. But it's just like the pretense of human beings, like, oh, don't you want to defer to other people? Don't you want to be nice to other people? Those same people who are indoctrinated by an empire, empirical, contrivance state, corporate modern time, all this kind of thing. So like, by being nice to, don't you want to be nice to people in World War II Germany? Don't you want to get along and whatever, overcompensate? Like, what if that means there's something wrong with that state, with that time period, or anything else? It's like, by reinforcing just this generic, just people thing, you're actually reinforcing a flawed process, because that would apply to anything. That you put people in a situation, and those people themselves will insist upon it because they have cognitive dissonance with the state that they're in. They don't want to admit they're wrong, or by their own standard, or inconsistent, or that they didn't choose it. But then also, you have the same thing too, of like, you should defer, and you should whatever, you should go along with this because it's for people, it's for other people, it's for the collective, it's for the community. The problem is that you would say that no matter what. Then in China right now, you should just go along because it's for other people, it's for the community. In World War II Germany, you should just go along because it's for the community, it's for other people. So like, it's used in a selective way. That's the concept of separation that I talk about. Separate people from everything, and then look at it from a standard accountable basis, instead of using social contrivance, ego, bypass, whatever, as a way to specify something, or to limit it. And so it's kind of like what I call the dependent overextended pretense that necessary and valid is like, you're doing this because of other people, be nice to other people. But if you really wanted to be nice to other people, what about amalgam theory? What about sacrificing that 3 meals a day to feed somebody else who's starving? What about, you wouldn't do that for other people, which will do something dependent over extended pretense, be nice on a social level, which has no impact, right? Which sort of shows you're in a false, absolute, subversive, contrivance state. You just kind of concede thought, concede value, concede monopoly over nature, concede everything, which makes you not credible at all. But yet you outwardly insist or reinforce and self-create an unqualified empirical state, overextended as it is. So that's one of the great defense mechanisms too that people have, is like, thinking is a bad thing. Or they try to attach some ego, projection, or incentive, but they really can't do that. Right? The long-form postulate, like what I do here, how can you really attach an incentive to it? Because it's kind of like, just... it's too broad, right? And it doesn't make a specific case, and it doesn't, benefit anything. I guess the framing would be similar to religion, like, you're just doing it as a reason as an excuse not to obey these mandates by supposedly God or whatever. But that's assuming that those are right in the first place. Like, in other words, you need the fallacy of permission I talk about. You need the permission of society, your government, or God, or whatever, or other people, to do that which you're inherently capable of doing. You have to justify the inherent freedoms, natural abilities you have, instead of they would have to justify why they ought to be restricted. And usually it's just guilty until proven innocent, laziness, lack of awareness of a process, right? So you have that you always see in a half-mass contrived state is people are never at peace with it, but the negative is projected on an initial basis, which shows you their control. So you can trigger people or have a negative reaction just by being neutral, just by not saying anything, not doing anything, right? Just neutral is negative because it's a state that they're not at peace with, but they pretend is absolute and treat as granted and default. So it's an outward, inconsistent, self-invalidating, right, cognitive dissonance-inducing contrivance state, but it's treated as a default, as an absolute. And the reason why is because, then that triggers them. So by being neutral and not overcompensating for it or playing into some performative aspect, it's like, oh, so it's absolute, but it requires the participation of other people to actively, constantly reinforce it because they're not at peace with it. Yet you're willing to outwardly insist and self-create that structure. So which is it? Like, you don't have any credibility, and so like pose this hypothetical: somebody who has all the money in the world, they're a trillionaire. It's like, what is their incentive? Right? The problem is it'll be discredited on either end. If you're a minimalist and you sleep on the forest floor and you eat one berry a day or something, you'll be discredited like, oh, you just lack the ability to achieve this half-mass zero-sum functionalism. Not that you don't really want it, or not that like, oh, you have some incentive that you must want money or something. Not that you simply could choose that lifestyle. But the other thing is the fact that like, or even the absolute is like you're a trillionaire, so you're out of touch, or you're somehow that'll be discredited too. But at what point do you use that? Like, okay, you're a minimalist, you don't want anything, so now you reveal the nature of the process, or that other people are controlled by, or you're asexual, so you could reveal the nature of the process that other people are controlled by, or you again, you are a trillionaire, so now you reveal the nature of the process that other people are controlled by, but then they project it onto you like, oh, but that's just you, that's just your fault, not that that's the nature of the process, right? That people want it. So people's own naive nature kind of interferes, and they don't want to believe that they're controlled that way, but that's like the unsympathetic aspect, is that, like, not only do other people not think objectively or try to qualify it first, as I call it, or again, practice amalgam theory of sacrifice, not only do they not do it themselves, but they'll even prevent you from doing it or ridicule you or something like that. You have to realize they're doing it as a defense mechanism because they're selfish and seek ego gratification and stuff like that. Right, that's really what it is. Like, what, you lack the ability to be controlled by your own ego, or you lack the ability to overcompensate and gratify other people. Not that that's not your intention, or no, it's not that you lack the ability. It's that you're aware of the nature of the process, and you're not trying to perpetuate it. right? But that's like, oh, it's not possible to do that, and oh, let's hide behind other people, or let's hide behind our children, or something like that. That you so selfishly preserve the stimuli acme without vouching for the state, and oh, now you rely on others, so you make yourselves weak, and then you're never at peace. You're always a basket case projecting evil in others in the negative projection of neutrality, because you're not at peace, but you pretend like you are. And that also reflects how you're controlled at the higher level, like the initial minded, like, oh, on this surface level, superficial level, you're going to be worried about something, but you take for granted the unqualified empirical overextended basis by which your whole life is controlled, because oh, it's out of sight, out of mind, and that's too much to think about. So you pretend like it doesn't exist, and the one who points out that it does exist and the signs therein are they're the one at fault, because you're a mindless sheep, basically. But the other aspect is the fact that, like the minimalist example, or the trillionaire example, or the even like, you know, you're aware of everything, you've experienced everything, or you know, whatever it is. Like, so now none of that stuff applies to you, but those projections will still be present because they're necessary to control you. People are so mindless that the reality doesn't matter, truth doesn't matter. Their preconceived conditioning and how they're controlled is what matters. They'll perceive it not because it's true, but so like a good example is the stimuli acme. You know, take any woman in modern society, and oh, a man, like, oh, you're projecting, oh, you must be like the I have a boyfriend effect or something. It must be about that, which both tells you their intent, like that's all that matters to them, that's all they care about, that's how they define themselves. But right, what if it doesn't even apply to you? It doesn't matter if it doesn't apply. The reality doesn't matter, right? It shows you their need. It shows you how they're controlled and how they are trained to kind of control others, because those projections have to exist. What if you have orgies every day and you have sex with everybody on the planet, like whenever you want, like you're whatever, you get around like that? Or what if you're asexual? Now those things don't apply. Now there's no base to control you. What if you're the world's first trillionaire, you don't need money? Now those things don't apply to you. Other projections, zero-sum means. Or what if, you know, non-ego basis, like everything's just zero-sum self-interest, so it doesn't matter, or you wouldn't insist upon some lowly half-mass functionalism. You would have, you know, an elitist higher standard point of view. But yeah, that's like the minimalist having no sympathy or respect for people in a contrivance state. They won't do it themselves, like their own pretense that they use to control others. It's a prop, right? And they'll even prevent you from doing it. Because again, if it inconveniences people or it causes them to sacrifice, oh, we can't have that. So we value other people as a pretense. Like, oh, let's be nice and let's reinforce this unqualified empirical state based on origin point of force and slaughtering people and genocide and slavery and all that. Like, no, but let's reinforce that state by being socially nice or something like that, but not look at the full or forget about even those past things. I'm saying even now, like let's look at it at a very basic level, the machination process versus the social contrivance. Oh, you know, you support a business because, oh, look, they're nice and it's a mom and pop local store or something like that, but then they still get their supplies, and they have to reasonably, from big companies and stuff like that. So, or even broadly, like, oh, it comes down to how nice the cashier was or something like that. But the process itself is overextended. So, like, not only do you not value the individual human basis that is used as a pretense, you're even allowing it to be done in service of that. So, oh, this big multinational corporation will hire some sweet old lady at the cash, and oh, now, like, oh, look at that sweet lady, and that's why we support this business. But they're using her as a prop to reinforce this overextended, unqualified empirical basis. So if you truly value the individual human basis, you wouldn't do that. Yeah, non-false negative, that you would have, like, neutrality is the enemy of contrivance. because it has to be projected into something such that it can be controlled, because that's how people themselves are controlled. So neutrality or non-unconditional, minimalism, absolutism, right? None of that can exist, which also indicates a non-value subversive state. That's like, you can't have true or full value for yourself or something else or anything, even though that false absolute value is used as a pretense of control, as in, like, to control every aspect of your life. Oh, we do it for other people, we value people. That's a cute pretense, but oh, you don't value amalgam theory, or if you value it fully, that's a bad thing. If you have to sacrifice for it, oh no, that doesn't fly. This is a selective, dependent, overextended pretense that's used to reinforce a specific contrived state, right? That's like the excesses that you have. Kind of nice weather though. We're getting into the summertime now. This route is pretty nice compared to some of them. Like going to Albany wasn't too bad. Going to Rochester was kind of weird. That one felt a little more awkward. Yeah, this going to Binghamton is a really straight, nice shot. And you could go to Pennsylvania just as well, just as easily. But yeah, like absolutists would never be at peace with the contrived state. They understand its origins, make it arbitrary. They understand that it's conditional, right? Or they see it as conditional, right? So it's like, ideally we'd remove the need, but instead we overextend and falsely desire it and reinforce it, right? Like moving towards self-governance, moving towards, you know, being in a state that we're capable of in our minds, etc., to not need it anymore. Or again, like a minimalistic aspect. So you don't take responsibility for the collective because you didn't create it, and you wouldn't even preserve it through the stimuli acme. So what it really is, if I want to break it down, is just these horny, hedonistic animals who can't control themselves, who don't know how to use a condom, who keep reproducing, and that's it. And so they'll go along with whatever, you know, and they'll use that even as a pretense or a problem. Like, oh, we're doing it for the children that we had irresponsibly, that we chose to do. Like, you don't get to use that as a basis. Like, so if it wasn't for having children, and if you kept it in your pants or you controlled yourself, then there would be no basis or reason for anything. And of course, the hedonistic element you kind of fall for, or they kind of gratify a half-mast that you have. That's why limerent siphons are pretty funny, and it shows you the impurity of the contrived state. You observe the objective inherent, but it's like self-fulfilling false duality. They'll project what they need to see to reinforce their half-mast contrived state, and then they'll see it everywhere, regardless of what the reality is. So it's like, it's pointless to even address it because it doesn't matter, right? The perspective of human functions half-mast is impure, right? They're looking for bias, confirmation bias, and like reinforcement of their state. They're not looking at objective reality. They're not interested in that. It's not useful to them, right? And so that incentive is kind of disqualifying as well. So yeah, like there's this preconceived box that everybody has to fit into in order to value some, you know, certain structure, style of life. So I call it like being controlled by a half-mast form of an inherent reality. So like the stimuli acme is a good example. In nature, animals reproduce all the time. They, you know, in human society, people can do the same thing, whatever. But again, with consent and with certain understanding. But what it means is like you're controlled by it, you're tamed and trained by it. Like an animal almost, because you're not, right? You're not simply seeing it for what it is. It's posed as a false absolute, but that ends up making it something less because you limit it, you restrict it, you specify to one person, and then you're controlled by it. it's used as a base of control, even like zero-sum means, half-mass gratification in the same way. But that's even the problem. It's like getting value from externality or social contrivance gratification. It's like the human mind is not limited in that way. So when you think like, oh, people are dumb or something, they're dumb in the way that they don't think when they can think. But in the functionalist sense, like, you're made to be dumb on purpose by society because it's meant for, that's meant for empirical control. So you need like a lot of mindless drones and stuff like that. So there's always like a myopic and selective framing that allows you to specify something and act like it has some basis, but that basis is very selective. So what are some other concepts here? Like, let me think. Like appearances, even to an absolutist or someone with a measure, would not be useful. They'd even be counterproductive. But again, you can see to a non-value subversive state, like, oh, well, your life and your time isn't really that important. You don't really have anything to do. Everything is just non-basis zero-sum self-interest. And now you overcompensate with appearances. But in doing that, you're basically admitting there is no basis of value. There is no absolute. There is nothing really that you have. It's just all zero-sum self-interest. And so now now there's no basis for structure, empirical authority, telling other people what to do. But there's no basis for any of that because you're acknowledging the premise. So even those initial projections are pretty good. Like, it's a great example of how to control people. It'll be projected on the initial personal basis, like, oh, this individual who doesn't socially contrive performative aspects, I'm going to project some incentive that they have, even though arguably it would indicate kind of the opposite. They must not have that incentive, the fact that they defer, or that they don't engage in that behavior, right? That it must mean they don't want anything, or they don't want to control others by the process, that they want people to be free of it and remove the need of everything contrived, maybe even themselves in that structure. But instead of seeing it that way, they'll see it there, but they won't see it in the nature of the process. So really what they're saying is they want to be fooled by it, but the ultimate observable practice is the same. So you have to kind of not think about it, and you have to kind of have some of this ego emotion bypass that goes on, but also just it's the same process in observable practice, but it requires certain framing to specify it or limit it or whatever. And then there's like a self-fulfilling false duality that's kind of interesting. Like, emperor has no clothes fallacy. This unqualified, outwardly insisting empirical authority structure, right? collective, pervasive way of life in a certain era is absolute, and then outwardly insists, and then, if you don't go along with it, you just lack the ability, you don't know any better, right? Inability to do the false absolute, not that it's not absolute, not that you can choose anything else. So again, it's sort of dumb in that way. I kind of don't have as much energy as I did in the day, but that was a pretty good session of explaining the conflict of contrivance and explaining the that's an example of the stimuli acme, how humor is associated with the cognitive dissonance of a repressed stimuli acme state. So it's like you have to really dumb everything down, because like people don't use their brain, so if you do, and there's no ego in it either, that's what will be projected, like some ego of like, you think you're so smart or something. It doesn't matter. It's like you're trying to get to an end goal of like, if everybody thought, then you wouldn't be controlled on the basis of things that are a result of them not thinking, and how they're controlled and how they project things on the, like, imagine taking these two things seriously, okay? Imagine taking appearances seriously, that are carefully curated, that people do just to show off to other people, right? Imagine taking that seriously. Like, if they wanted to hide something from you, they would. If they wanted to show something to you, they would. So like, but we pretend like, you look so nice today. It's like they know, because they dressed and bought that dress, and they spent money and effort and time to do it. It's like, so it's like in any other way that would invalidate the process. Like, you only did that to get that reaction, so then what? Like, so again, appearances are curated in that way, or even the big picture is like social contrivance, like, you're only doing that for that reason. It's like, so again, that's the insecurity of a contrivance state. Like, they project an incentive where none exists, because that's just how they're trained and that's how they're controlled, and they can't be free, they can't remove the need, they falsely desire the contrivance state that they're basically slaves to, and then it kind of shows you the fault of the process. So it'll be specified and personalized, of course, even though by their own admission or recognition it'd be a flawed process, but they don't acknowledge that. Right, you sacrifice or serve as an example, and so that's what an absolutist can do, and certain things that they keep trying to show others the artificial nature of the process, or they just naturally do, but it's always taken as an initial personal thing, like, they lack the ability to do something, or they are projected in something. So like, it would be negative, so you have to overcompensate and be controlled by social contrivance, performative aspects, appeal to ego, overcompensation. So it's the same thing, but you just want to be controlled. Again, you project it where it doesn't exist, and you ignore it where it does exist. So basically saying you would find a negative, but you rely on that overcompensative performative aspects and stuff. Absolutist with a measure that would be like something people don't understand within a false reality sense, like somehow that's your fault. something with nuance or awareness of the process versus their own. This is where the projected false absolutes, etc. come in. They're insecure, they're not at peace, they require centering reality, they require framing, so that their insecurity comes out, and they project because right, they have no imagination. So it's often the stimuli acme or zero sum means, like, pretend your incentive is something different. You value time so that you can achieve a measure, so that you can do amalgam theory, so that you can do a larger process, right? But it would be projected as something else. Or like, so that projection says more about the observer than what is observed. Or even like the stimuli acme or something versus something creative. Like, this is why fetishes somewhat are condemned. Like, that fetishes can be the path to freedom. It's like, no, you don't want sex. You're not interested in sex at all. You could be asexual, but you have some certain thing that you want, some very specific thing. Like, oh, I want some psychological stimulation and something creative, and like, so that's what you want, but it'll be projected, or you need the permission of that. Like, oh, that's weird to do. Or like, it'll be projected into, oh no, you must just be using that as a pretense or a front to achieve the same thing. But you don't realize that people can have actual different preferences, right? Where no, they find that more exciting, or they find something else of value. So what's projected in that is pretty funny, actually, to put it to the test of the stimuli acme. You would have right, like, that's projected whether it's there or not, and there's strong, like, social engineering, conditioning, right, to do preconceived notions. And so, but no, that's one aspect of contrivance that folds on itself. Neutrality is a negative. They're not at peace. They're constantly looking over their shoulders, false absolute, but they're not at peace with it. They're not aware of the process. Constantly looking over their shoulders, constantly worried about initial performative aspect, constantly this, constantly that. Right? They're not at peace, even though it's false absolute. They leave themselves weak. They defer. They rely on externality. Right? You kind of are trained in that way. So. Where I had like the A and W or something? It might have been, because there's none around immediately where I live. I think it was like Portland. But yeah, you'd realize, like, okay, everything is the same process. It's arbitrary. So there's always like this projection of a half-mast, reinforced, regurgitated state. Like, everything must be to reinforce it or to achieve something that's projected, not that anything else could exist, to bring finality or to remove the need or anything like that. So to not preserve the stimuli acme is also within that, like, right, to not preserve the stimuli acme would take on the form of something else, like whatever. But yeah, like, that brings up like the state versus perspective. It's like, oh, you're whatever, like, something that's lacking in the eyes of contrivance would be it can't be a choice, and it can't be like, oh, that's why you do it for some deliberate reason. It must be that, oh, you just lack the ability to do it, or you don't know any better, basically. Or like, even the sad part about even objective observation or anything like that, it'll be used as a prop then to try to reinforce their own false duality contrivance state. never objective observation, never inherent reality. Because if you did observe that, then you wouldn't be at peace with the contrived state, or it wouldn't be, so uniform. That's the whole irony of framing it as a claim. It's like the claim is the specific contrivance. The claim is the censoring of reality. The claim is the everyday, social contrivance that's necessary. The claim is not objective reality. Despite that doesn't make any specific case. About 40 minutes left where I'm going, but I kind of don't have a lot of energy right now, so but yeah, like to observe the nature of the process, that would be projected that, the process applies to you, or to be aware of it, or so like you specify the conflict. It's like, if it's an issue, then it's an issue. If it's not, it's not. But instead, it's conditionally an issue, and it depends on the degree of overcompensation. So you reject that basis. Like the non-required, non-desire concept that I talk about, like it doesn't appeal to you, apply to you, or even to the extent that it did, like, you value other people, you would value it inherently then, not... You would value it inherently, not as it's tied to some half-ass functionalism or something like that. And so that's the unconditional teachings that you can have. It's like amalgam theory and just objectivity in general. It's like it doesn't make a case, a specific case. It's something that people don't do and they're not familiar with. It's again objective reality, inherent reality, despite or regardless of the contrivancy that you're in. It's kind of impure and not credible, and has tremendous incentive to it. And so an absolutist, I can paint the picture, right? An absolutist character of mine, like they're broken down and disheveled and exhausted, and they look all bad, performative aspect. Their appearance wouldn't be very flattering, and so a subversive half-ass society would condemn that. Like, you got to look good, you got to worry about things that don't matter, like appearances, but they're sacrificing their appearance for something that actually matters. Or in general, they just don't value it, so they care about action and things like that. Versus, again, the half-assed that value appearances and overcompensations and cover things up like that. Right, because when you value things like either appearances or escapism or folly favoritism and stuff, it's like, okay, let's say I value that, or like I've done that, like, okay, folly favoritism, right? So I would defer and say, okay, that hurts my credibility. That means, I wouldn't outwardly insist or tell other people what to do. But other people do the same thing, and they do outwardly insist or actively self-create a contrived state. So what does that mean? What does that mean? Like, so it's false negative projected on you, like you're aware of the nature of the process and they're not, or you're more aware, right? you're more aware, and that's bad, is projected onto you, even though the process is the same. And so that's kind of the initial minded way that people think, like, oh no, society is just everything surface level and appearances, even though it's been eras and eras and ages of careful curation, consideration, how people are controlled. There's so much thought and resources that goes into controlling people, but you would take it at face value and therefore do them a service. They're putting a lot of thought into controlling you, but you're not putting any thought into observing that. You just take it at face value and treat it like a default, like, oh no, that's just normal, it's no big deal, that's just the way it is. Whereas, no, it's a carefully curated process to try to control you, right? But again, you do it a great service by not thinking about it. Not only not thinking about it, but even actively reinforcing it or overcompensating for it. Okay, so we got about like a half hour left of my drive. I mean, this is the best way to do it sometimes when you're driving anyway, like, so I may as well just stream, but the problem is the audio quality isn't always the best, but yeah, let me do a couple more concepts here. Like, for example, this is more like a short form thing where sometimes I'll go in depth about a concept, but this is just kind of surface level. So what happens is, I was kind of bugging out. Hang on, I was trying to look at my notes on my phone. Down. So like, what I was saying earlier, though, when it comes to the conflict of contrivance, is that you treat in society like everything is a false absolute default, but there's nothing is absolute, right? That's part of what an absolutist is, right? Like, there are no absolutes, so that's why the only absolute would be human behavior or human action, right? So it's left to us instead of deferring to all this nonsense like superstition or horoscopes and stuff like that. And then even like your contrivance state, you treat it as default, like, oh, I'm just a poor little old lady or whatever member of society, and I'm just going about my business, and I'm just trying to do grocery shopping, and I'm just trying to do my day. Meanwhile, that day actively creates a contrived outward state that you have to vouch for then by doing that. So you should at least think about it or have some cognitive dissonance instead of vouching for it as false absolute default. That's why appearances are so important, to disguise that and treat it like, oh, this is just a default, this is just an absolute. But it's outward. Everything is outward. This is you're buying that groceries from an unqualified empirical authority that takes monopoly over nature, acquired through an empirical basis, by force, and so on and so on. It's like, it's not absolute, right? But yet you are tricked into believing that. Yeah, there'd be like a strong non-ego basis with the absolutist. Like, nothing is really to be proud of. It's like either you can do something more or less efficiently. It's a zero-sum process. You're just trying to remove the need. You could require less. You don't need overcompensation, right? So it's like, what is there to be proud of? It's non-basis self-interest. It's zero-sum process. Like, why does it matter? When things are personalized, that's a great way to control it. The mind is infinite objective. You can think anything at any time, but it's personalized. Like, oh, that's you. So everybody's a mindless sheep who doesn't think. The one person who does think, oh, that stands out. That's you. That's outward. That's whatever. Right? Not that that's just a default state, or it should give you credibility and not them, because like, you actually think and they don't. But but somehow that's a bad thing for you, not them. So like